Evening, everybody. My name's Matt Heason. I'll do a little quick introduction from me first, and then I shall hand over to Beth. Thanks for joining us. I'm just talking to you and admitting people to the meeting at the same time, so excuse me whilst I multitask. It would be fab if you could turn off your cameras. I think it's probably best for Beth if she's just got. I'm going to turn mine off as soon as I finish speaking, but I just thought you could see who I am whilst I'm nattering away. Okay, so yeah, my name's Matt Heason. I organise ShAFF Adventure Film Festival, Books and Adventure Festival, various other things. I'm a runner, climber, biker, etc. Yeah, I'll do a little bit of housekeeping first, and I'll introduce Beth to you. Just admitting more people. Yeah, it's a really popular night tonight. We've got 222 people in so far, with more to come. So you're in good company, Beth. Yeah, obviously you can leave your mobile phones on because we won't hear them because you're muted. On the joys of online talks. Although Beth's dog has just turned up with a squeaky toy. They thought they'd found all the squeaky toys, but he's found one that they hadn't. So we may get some interruptions from the dog later. I am recording this conversation, this talk, and we will be publishing it on the YouTube, on one of our YouTube channels afterwards. So I'll send details of that. So if you miss it or miss a part of it, or you know somebody who missed it, you can share it with them later. And I guess the important thing is I'm doing this for a living, and Beth is raising. So basically, we were asking you to donate what you feel it was worth afterwards, or what you can afford. I will send details in the chat later on. I'll follow up with an email. Beth is going to donate her half to Mountain Rescue in the Lake District, and obviously I'm going to use the other half to continue to host events like this. So I'll post all those details in the chat as we go. If you have questions and you want to post them in the chat, when Beth finishes speaking, I will field some questions for her. There's way too many people here for her to answer all the questions. So if you don't get your question answered, please don't be upset. Beth will explain maybe how you can communicate those questions by other means. You can actually post in the comments on the YouTube video of the talk, and she may come to that later. What else do I need to tell you? Not a lot of housekeeping. I think that's pretty much it. It's going to last about 45 minutes or so, the talk, and then we'll do maybe 15 or 20 minutes of questions, and then we'll wrap up and go and get on with some Christmas celebrations. Okay, so on to Beth. As I said, I'm a runner. I was very lucky to grow up in Snowdonia in North Wales. If any of you have done the Paddy Buckley or supported a Paddy Buckley round, you will know the car park by the Aberglaslyn Bridge. I grew up in the house next to that car park. My folks still live there. And during the summer, I was there visiting my folks, and was parked up in the car park, and saw Beth and her partner basically hanging around by the van there. Recognised Beth from the internet and films, etc. And I went over and introduced myself and said, chatted about her running and what she was up to, and congratulated her on the round, Bob Graham. And then I said, oh, by the way, I organise talks. Would you be interested in doing a talk? And she foolishly said yes, and took her at her word, and followed up, and here we are. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Beth. I'm going to mute my camera, and hope that you guys all enjoy the evening. And if you've got any questions, post them to me privately on the chat, and I'll do my best to respond to everybody. I'm going to allocate a spot prize at some point, and we'll let you know. And Beth's also got a prize to give out for the best question. That's some salmon packs to give out. Oh yeah, I was going to ask one more question before we start, just because I'm interested. If you could post in the chat where you're from, I'm really interested to see where everybody's from. So that'd be great if you could do that, and I'll keep a copy of the chat. And yeah, I'll hand up to Beth. Thanks, Beth.
Thanks, Matt, for that introduction and for inviting me to come and talk today. And thank you to everyone who submitted questions in advance. It really helps with knowing what you guys want to hear. So I'll do my best to answer all those as I go through, and as Matt said, there'll be opportunity to ask questions at the end as well. So I'll talk a bit about myself and my background in running, and before moving on to my preparation for the Bob Graham and what happened on the day. Okay, the slide isn't moving on for some reason. Here we go. Okay, so let's rewind 28 years about. So I grew up on a farm in Somerset, and I spent all my childhood running around, chasing sheep, riding horses. And I remember it must have been in the last year of primary school or first year of secondary school that I did my first cross-country race, and I did quite well. And certainly no one does any structured training at that age, but clearly all the running around on the farm had helped me. And we spent all our childhood in the holidays. We'd be in the lakes or Snowdonia or in Scotland, sometimes further afield, always walking up hills. Ironically, I often protested about having to climb mountains in our holidays. I remember one occasion we were in the lakes and my parents said we were going to climb Scafell Pike, which we did. And when we got to the top of Scafell Pike, they said, oh, let's just nip up Scafell as well. And I threw a tantrum at the bottom of Lord's Rake and refused to go up, and they had to bribe me up with chocolate. I was quite sporty at school. I used to play hockey, and I did cross country. I think I was county cross country champion at one stage. And so I was okay at running, but my school didn't take it that seriously. There was very little in terms of structured training, but I was always really keen to improve. And I had no idea what I was doing, but I used to make up my own training sessions, doing interval sessions on the lane next to our house using trees as distance markers. But I was really very clueless, and I never really thought I could be any good at running. When I went to university, I took up rowing. I'm not sure why, because I'm not quite tall enough to be a rower, but I discovered lightweight rowing, and I became quite good at that, and I did that to quite a high level in the first few years at university, although I was very strong, but I could never quite match my strength with my technical ability. So when rowing got difficult to fit in with sort of the latter years of medical school, I gave that up, and I was kind of in limbo really with what to do for a few years in terms of sport and exercise. My dad gave me the book Feet in the Clouds by Richard Asquith, and I read about the Bob Graham in that, and I was amazed. I thought it sounded really cool, but nothing that I could ever see myself doing. But after that, I was kind of keen to get more involved in trail running and fell running. So I entered some races. One of the first races I did was the Lake Noon 100, which is a 100-mile race around the Lake District. And I came second in that the first year I did it, and that was kind of a defining moment for me. I thought, oh, maybe I can be okay at this. And after that, I started to kind of learn more about how to train to run ultra marathons, and yeah, just how to improve as a runner, I suppose. I did the Dragon's Back race in 2015, which this photo it has come from, and it's a 200-mile race covering the length of Wales, and it's all off trail. And it's a navigational exercise as well. Back then there was no set route. The route got announced on that day, but you had to do all your own navigating. And when I was preparing for that race, I spent an awful lot of time in Snowdonia, trying to recce different possible routes. And I think I became quite good at running on rough terrain back then, and that's kind of stayed with me, I think. I've done a few other fell races. This is the Yorkshire Three Peaks race. I've done the Welsh 3000ers. I actually ran a Paddy Buckley round back in 2017, which, as Matt mentioned earlier, it's the Welsh equivalent of the Bob Graham round. And I ran the second fastest time on that. So I do have some sort of background in fell running. But for one reason or another, I spent the next few years just running on trails. I fell in love with the UTMB, which is a famous and competitive trail race around Mont Blanc. And yeah, it was great fun, but I was still doing all my training on the fells really. A lot of the races in Europe are on quite smooth, fast trails, but when you're training in the UK, you're always in the lakes or Snowdonia, and inevitably you're running on really rough terrain. So I found that I was always quite good at the technical downhills compared to my competitors when doing the trail races. I kind of found my niche in the 100-mile distance, I suppose. So I've been really lucky to go and race all over the world. I went out to California to race the Western States 100, which is the oldest 100-mile race in the world, last year, and that's on really smooth, fast trails in 40-degree heat, and it couldn't really be more different from the Lake District. So I started to have some success in these trail races. I've been on the podium at quite a few. I came fourth at the UTMB and fourth at the Western States. And yeah, it becomes quite addictive, I guess. Not really the success, but a lot of these races they're really hard to get into, as in often there's a lottery to get into them. And for the Western States, for example, it now can take up to 10 years to get a space. But if you're doing well at them, then you can get invited along and get elite spaces. And that, it seemed that sometimes the opportunities were too good to turn down. And the Bob Graham had always been on my mind, but I always thought that it would be there, but the opportunity to do these other big trail races might not. I didn't know how long I'd be able to do that for. So this is now 2020. This is me at the Seville Marathon in February. It's a truly awful photo, but it kind of summarizes how I felt about running a marathon. And I certainly wouldn't have run a marathon if I knew it was the only race I'd run this year. The problem is, if you spend all year running 100-mile races in the mountains, you get kind of slow. So I always think it's a good idea to do a bit of faster training over the winter months to try and get a bit of speed back in the legs. I had big plans for 2020, as most people did. And yeah, the plan was to turn to the longer races later in the year. I was also planning to take a sabbatical from my work and to go over to the US and train and race out there for a few months. And then this happened. So this is me about to do a virtual race, doing laps of our little field at home. I think I'm looking a lot happier about it for the photo than I think I was at the time. So I remember it was in March when I think we were all somewhat in denial about how serious the coronavirus situation was. And I was doing a talk at a trail running workshop in the lakes when Trump announced that they were closing borders to the US, and I was due to fly out the following week. And I think it was that moment when I realised that, you know, all 2020 plans were going to pot. We'd have to cancel our wedding, and you know, I'd just have to rethink everything. And I went outside to our van and had a big cry, and woke up the next morning and I felt much better, and I knew what I was going to do. I was going to run a Bob Graham round. And I surprised myself, I think, about how quickly I accepted all of this. And yeah, the Bob Graham was the obvious thing for me to do. There wasn't really anything else that felt meaningful enough to me, I suppose. But at this time, I presumed I'd just be running for the second fastest time. I thought the record was completely out of reach. I did mention it to a few people who suggested I go for something slightly more achievable, but I said no. I wanted to run the second fastest Bob Graham time, and that meant more to me than getting the fastest time on anything else. So I am a paediatrician, and again, this is not a great photo. I'm looking tired, as I usually am at work. I think it was taken pre-COVID, as I'm obviously not wearing PPE. And yeah, it was a stressful time at work during those early months. I had to go to a different hospital because I planned to take this sabbatical. My previous job wasn't available to me, so I got a job somewhere else. Yeah, and there was just lots of, it was stressful because there was lots of change and things, and I was working a lot more hours than I normally do, and that was partly out of choice, but partly covering other people who were self-isolating. Yeah, so it was tough, but at the same time, there were lots of good things about it, in that, my commuting time to get to work was halved, and I didn't have to arrive at work an hour early just in order to get a space in the car park. So it actually, I had more hours in the day to train, I suppose. The other thing is that I normally get ill a lot. I pick up every single viral infection, mainly because I'm, usually training hard and sleep deprived and around snotty children all the time. But I had about an eight month period where I didn't get ill at all. And that really helped with training as well. And that's purely down to wearing PPE all the time at work, I think. So the Bob Graham round, so going back to basics, it's a loop in the Lake District that is divided into 5 legs, divided by road crossings, and you start and finish at the Moot Hall in Keswick. It takes in 42 peaks and is around 66 miles, but depends on which route you take. And the challenge is to complete it within 24 hours. Bob Graham himself ran 42 peaks back in 1932, and he broke the Lake's 24-hour record in doing so. The route has changed slightly since then, but it's still a 42 peak round. You can become a member of the Bob Graham Club by completing the round in 24 hours, but also you have to be witnessed by an accompanying runner at every single summit in order to get accepted into the Bob Graham Club. Here you can see a list of, the progression of the women's record. So women have been rushing around the hills for quite a long time, but not as long as the men. Billy Bland set the Bob Graham record in 1982, setting an astonishingly fast time that wasn't broken for another 26 years, which was broken by Killian Shawnee in 2018. And when Jasmine Paris ran 15 hours, 24 minutes in 2016, I presumed, and I think everyone presumed, that record was going to stand for decades. It was going to be like Billy Bland's record. It was, almost untouchable. So what did training look like? So I live in Derbyshire, but not in the Peak District. So I don't have big hills out the doorstep. So in the early lockdown months in April and May, I was just trying to get as much climbing in my legs as possible. So I would do long runs, running up and down the same hill on 1 kilometre loops, like you see in this picture, although it doesn't look very steep at this point. And the closest hill I have to home is about 15 minutes long. So I was doing really hard hill reps on a 15-minute hill as well. And yeah, I was doing, a decent volume of training, and it was really, I think my running life balance tipped further in favour of running than it ever has before. And yeah, I thought to get really fit, I'd have to take some risks. And yeah, I did wonder at times whether the training I was doing was sustainable. It certainly wouldn't have been sustainable all year round, but in terms of volume and consistency of training, it was probably the best training block of my life. I think the absence of races probably played a part as well, just having more consistency in training. So when we were allowed to travel again, I was taking day trips up to the lakes because that's all we were able to do, and I started looking more closely at the route. I had run leg 4 of the Bob Graham back in March, just before we went into lockdown. And I felt like a complete amateur on the fells. I hadn't quite realised how much you could de-skill at running on rough terrain, because I'd been spending all the winter running on the roads. But yeah, I felt hopeless. But after a solid few more months on the fells, I felt really strong on the technical terrain again. So I started running all the different legs. I knew them loosely before, but I hadn't recce'd them before with my own round in mind, so paying attention to the small details and things. It's quite a drive for me to get up to the lake, so I always felt that I had to run for at least longer than I'd be driving for. So I might do 1 or 2 legs consecutively, but usually doing out and backs because I was usually on my own. So runs might go on for 6 or 8 or 10 hours. I started off doing them quite slowly, so paying lots of attention to the navigation and maybe going back and trying different routes up different fells and things. And by July, I knew the route pretty well. I still wouldn't consider myself an expert, but I'd run all the legs 4 or 5 times, and I was pretty confident with the route. It is possible to go and just do a Bob Graham on site without having recce'd it. I think it's not too hard to get lost, but certainly to take the optimal route, you really need to know it well. Having pacers who know the route really helps you as well. And I was planning to have pacers on the day, so I knew that I didn't have to know it inside out, but for my own head, I wanted to know it fairly well. So yeah, I think I had about a 3-month block where I was doing 80 or 90 miles a week. I think I did one 120 mile a week, and that was all with close to 2,500 feet of climbing. And in July, I went up. I had some annual leave at the beginning of July and went up in the van, and during that week I ran all the legs at Jasmine's pace, at record pace, and I really surprised myself. I was doing that with a pack and with tired legs, and usually in bad conditions. And it was at that point that I started to think that going for the record was possible. And yeah, I kind of built on that, I suppose. So this is broad stand, which is another important point in the round to make sure you recce and learn in advance. So there is no easy and direct route between Scafell Pike and Scafell. The most direct route is broad stand, as you can see, which is a series of rock steps and slabs. It's not much to look at, but there is about a 3-meter section that is quite tricky. And it's always greasy and running with water. And if you slip, you fall about 20 meters. And unfortunately, it has seen a lot of fatalities. And you have to also take into account that at this point, you've got 40 miles of hard running in your legs. So you don't really know what your body, how it's going to react. There are alternative routes to get up Scafell, either via Fox's Tarn or Lord's Rake. But the problem is they involve descending a lot further and then climbing back up again. So this is me and my dog about to go up broad stand a couple of weeks before my round. On all my recce runs, I'd gone and looked at broad stand and kind of chickened out and gone the longer way round. And I'm glad I did, to be honest. So Matt and I went up a couple of weekends before and had a look at it. And yeah, I was surprised by how tricky it was. And I was really happy to have a rope and harness to help me. I mean, I can climb. I wouldn't say I'm a climber. So I certainly, wouldn't recommend people who've never done any climbing to go up broad stand. So when doing rounds like this, most people have a schedule. I think it's really useful. So I had my arrival times at every summit, essentially. And it's helpful for your support team. So the people who are driving around the road, giving you supplies, but it's also good if you're going for a specific time or a record, it's useful to know whether you're on target or not. And I've been quite meticulous about writing my schedule. So I had used all of Jasmine's splits and then tweaked them slightly based on all my data from my record-paced training runs. And what I came up with was something I thought was quite accurate. And I'd actually memorised most of these splits as well, not really intentionally, but you get quite obsessed with these things. So I planned to do my round on a Saturday, which would make sense. But as you do, I was constantly refreshing all the weather apps on my phone in the week beforehand, and it became clear that Saturday was going to be a complete washout. I had all my paces lined up for the Saturday, so I didn't really think I'd be able to change my mind. But I asked a few of my pacers whether they'd be available on Friday, and some of them were. Most of them weren't because they had to work, but a few of them were, and I had a lot of help, and between us all, we managed to rally enough people together to do the round on a Friday. It was a really stressful few days, and it wasn't until the day before that I realised it was actually going to happen. I registered my round the morning before, and I then found out that some new rules had been introduced in that you were only allowed 2 paces per leg. Just during COVID times. And again, I had to do more reshuffling. Apparently it's always been a recommendation just to have 2 paces because of issues with erosion, with more and more people doing the round. But in previous years I've seen people with 8 or 10 people running with them. But certainly I'd heard rumours that there were a series of cells under Moot Hall, the Bob Graham prison, that you go to if you break the rules. So I certainly didn't want to go there. So a few of my pacers, well, all my pacers were aware of my ambitions to have a go at Jasmine's record, but I didn't tell anyone else because I honestly thought I'd be laughed at. I thought it could be possible, but I still would have bet against myself to break the record. So it's now the 24th of July, and it's approaching 5 a.m. and we're gathering outside the Moot Hall. Matt and I had camped in the van just below Skiddaw the night before, and waking up that morning there was thick clag above 400 metres, but as I ate my breakfast it gradually cleared and I started to get really excited. A lot of people have asked me why I didn't have a tracker for my round, and it's become the norm, certainly this year, to carry a GPS tracker so you can let everyone know that you're doing it and then they can follow you all day. I think that I didn't want it to have a high profile. I didn't want the added pressure, and I think it's I didn't want to publicise it, partly because of the pressure, and partly I didn't feel that it was within the spirit of fell running. Really, I just wanted to go out and have a good day. It'd been such a stressful few days, it didn't really cross my mind to figure out getting a pacer. It was getting a tracker. It was just another thing to think about. So I met a lot of my pacers for the first time on the day. A few of the guys I knew beforehand, but most of them I didn't, and a lot of them were locals, but a lot of them had travelled travelled a long way to come and help me out, and I was really touched by that. And I think that probably helped me as well, knowing that everyone else had gone out their way to help me out. I certainly wasn't going to give up easily on the day. I think that kind of motivates me during other races I've done as well. When I'm having a tough time, I think about all the people who've helped get me there. My husband, my coach, my family, and all the time they've given up. And I think it's, on the face of it, running is a really individual sport, but actually there are so many people involved in these things. So when it came to actually setting off on my round, I was just so relieved. As I said, it had been such a stressful few weeks and few months, actually. I was just so happy to get going. And I was a bit nervous that I could have been a bit tired. I'd had very little sleep in the week beforehand, and I was a little bit concerned I might have overcooked it with the training. But it was too late to do anything about it now. And it was, after everything that had gone on beforehand, the day was actually the easiest part of it all. So the first summit is Skiddaw, and I'd given myself 1 hour and 4 minutes to get up Skiddaw. And I looked at my watch on the summit, and we got up in 58 minutes. I was really surprised because the climb had felt really comfortable, and yeah, we chatted all the way up. But I think I just didn't. I underestimated how much difference it makes not carrying a pack and having fresh legs, I suppose. We met Ricky Lightfoot on the summit, and he was supposed to be pacing me on the Saturday, but he couldn't make it because he had to go to work. But he was out for his pre-work run and came and met us. And he was joking, but he said, "Beth, are you trying to break Jasmine's record or Killian's?" Implying that I was going off way too fast. And yeah, I did worry a bit at that point, and I really tried to slow down after that. So leg one is notoriously boggy at the best of times, but it was truly awful. It was more like winter conditions going over Great Calver as well. I'd run the leg a couple of weeks previously, so I knew it was going to be like this. And this is the river just below Great Calver. A couple of weeks before, it had been almost up to my waist, and I felt a little nervous crossing it, but it had gone down a bit, but the underfoot conditions were still really, really soft. So this is us emerging at the bottom of Blencathra, about to run out into the village of Threlkeld. So Blencathra is the last summit on leg one, and there are 2 or maybe 3 different ways you can run off it, but most people have the decision between 2 routes. The first route, and the most popular route, is Hallsfell Ridge, which is a trail. You don't have to, I mean, the navigation is not too difficult, but it's a rocky ridge that, you know, there's some degree of exposure. But the fastest, not necessarily the fastest, but the most direct route is called the Parachute, which, as the name implies, it's pretty steep. It's essentially, you just drop straight off the summit and down this super steep, rough, rocky, heathery slope. And you do need to know where you're going. And I recce'd the Parachute a few times in training, and I was confident that for me it was going to be faster. I think if you don't know the line well, it's probably best to take Hallsfell Ridge, and if you're not super confident on really rough terrain, Hallsfell Ridge is probably the best way to go. But knowing myself and what terrain I like, I thought I'd go for it. Even though I knew the route well myself, it's always best to follow somebody, just because then you can just get your head down and concentrate on running rather than being constantly looking up and making sure you're taking the right line. And you're also less likely to make mistakes if you're following as well. So we met Neil Talbot on the summit of Blencathra, and he's a great navigator, and we followed him off. And yeah, it took us 18 minutes to get from the summit of Blencathra to the road crossing at the A66. So I was happy with my decision. So moving on to leg 2, I was running with a couple of lads, Jacob Adkin and Chris Richards, and they're both phenomenal runners and also nearly a decade younger than me. So they're super, super fit, and certainly it was just a walk in the park for them. The first summit of leg 2 is Clough Head, and it's a long old slog. It's really steep, seems to go on forever even when you're fresh. And as we set off up Clough Head, Jacob asked me if I normally ran all the way up, and I honestly thought he was joking, but clearly he normally does run all the way up. I honestly didn't think it was possible to, but yeah, just testament to what a fantastic runner he is. So yeah, we gradually chipped away at all the splits all the way through the leg, and yeah, I felt comfortable, I suppose. And we arrived at the end of leg 2, 22 minutes up on schedule. It's interesting because if this had been a race, or if I was running somewhere I'd never been before, you know, I've done a lot of ultra races now. I'm pretty happy with gauging the effort level, and I should know what kind of effort level feels sustainable for a certain amount of time. But because I was running to these splits, I was constantly worried that I was going too fast. And yeah, I should have just trusted my body, trusted my instincts, but yeah, I couldn't really relax because I just had this nagging feeling in my head that I was going to blow up at any point. So there's always a debate about whether using poles are beneficial when running on the fells. Certainly I'm a big fan of them, but it's something you really need to practice, you really need to work on. I think that the Europeans use poles really, really well because they've got a really well developed upper body strength from skiing or cross-country skiing and skimo in the winter, but perhaps the Brits just get them out for the races and don't use them particularly well. But it's something I've really worked on. I've always, you know, trained with poles, and I do some upper body strength exercises specifically for this, and I really think that they help me a lot. So now we're back to Broad Stand on the day. Matt, my husband, was up there, and his mate Joe, and they'd rigged it up for us. So we had a harness at the bottom, all ready for me to step into, with a rope, so I was protected. And we also had a fixed rope just in case I needed to pull up it if I was really, really struggling. And I'm glad I had it, to be honest. And yeah, it was running with water on the day. I was with Shane Oley at this point, and he's a great climber. And when we got up to the top, we both got cramps in our quads after that, and it must have been from the strain of the climb. And I've never got cramp in the context of, you know, running a long way before. It was quite severe for a short period of time. Shane had these just electrolyte tablets, and we just crunched them up neat and ate them, and that seemed to do the trick. And it was kind of niggling for a while after that, but certainly, yeah, it could have been a disaster, but wasn't. So now we're running off Scarfell into the Wasdale Valley, and I always enjoy running on this scree. It just feels so good on your legs after all those miles of, you know, you really hammer your quads on the descents, but in the scree it just feels kind of light and effortless. And I started to relax a lot more by this point, and yeah, I think this was probably the most enjoyable part of the round. It felt great. So we're now on to leg 4, and I thought at this point that, you know, if I'd gone off too hard, it was too late to do anything about it. So I may as well just keep pushing on and pushing hard. The first climb of leg 4 is U-Barrow. And U-Barrow is a real beast. It's almost, you know, you're always on your hands and knees at points. It's really, really steep. And I think it's the crux of the round, really. If you can get up there in a good time, then, you know, you're probably, you know, you're most of the way home. But if you're struggling at that point, then yeah, it could all be downhill from there. I'd given myself 37 minutes on my schedule to get up U-Barrow, and got up in 35 minutes. And I think that was the moment I thought, you know, I can do this, like, barring disasters, I'm going to break the record. So that was a real relief. I think I'd been really worried about that climb. And yeah, we were moving well. I was with Neil Talbot again and a guy called Rich on this leg, and they showed me a few little sneaky lines that perhaps saved, you know, 20 or 30 seconds here and there that I didn't know before. Yeah, so it was just really enjoyable. When we arrived at Honister, which is the final road crossing, up until that point I'd been very efficient at the road crossings. I hadn't stopped. I just grabbed a glass of Coke and swigged it as we went through. But at Honister, I think I was a bit too jolly, and I was chatting to people and, you know, had lost my sense of urgency, and I had to be prompted to leave again. So now we're on the final leg, climbing Dale Head. I was with Kim Collison, who is the Lakes 24-hour record holder, and George Foster, who recently ran the second fastest Bob Graham time. I'm not sure if I had started to smell at this point, or whether they're just taking the social distancing very seriously. Anyway, they were both, you know, well overqualified to be running with me on this leg. And yeah, like I've done plenty of races where the final few miles are really miserable. You're just counting down the miles until you can stop running. But I can honestly say it wasn't like that. I wasn't fresh, or I wouldn't say I, wanted to run for longer, but I was enjoying myself, and yeah, I wasn't in pain or so exhausted that I couldn't hold a conversation. And even the final road section at the end, so there's this 7-mile section on the road, which I was dreading. Most people dread it because that tarmac is just really hard on your tired legs. But even that was perfectly pleasant. I was just ecstatic, I think, because I knew what the outcome was going to be, and yeah, just enjoyed the whole thing. So I'm now running towards the Moot Hall, the final few yards until I can stop. And yeah, I felt really emotional. Despite my attempts to keep it under the radar, a fair few people had turned out to see me finish. I think that was mainly because Salomon had put some Instagram stories up, and people had got wind of it that way. Yeah, I was emotional. I had to fight back the tears climbing the steps of Moot Hall. And lots of people have asked me whether, the Bob Graham means more to me than any of the other trail races I've done. And I think it probably does. And that surprised me, I suppose, because I've always prioritized races up until this point. I think in part because of the year we had so far, with everything seemingly going wrong, and finally something had gone right, and that just made it feel so much better. So there's a pub next to the Moot Hall called The Round, and they've set up this new thing where they give you a pint when you finish a Bob Graham. And I'm ashamed to say that I only managed a few sips before I had to give the rest to my parents. Yeah, so it had been a good day. The weather had been kind. In terms of, how the day played out and the physical shape I was in, I couldn't really have asked for much more. Certainly I didn't have the dry underfoot conditions that, say, Killian had when he broke the men's record in 2018. But in general, I'm really, really happy with how the day went. So here's a list of the fastest times over the Bob Graham. I put Ryan Smith in grey, even though in a way his round was even more impressive than the others, because he did it mainly solo, so his round doesn't officially count. George Foster, who ran that exceedingly fast time just a couple of months ago, and I are both have the same coach, so we're coached by Martin Cox. And I don't think that's a coincidence. I think that certainly Martin did a great job with getting us in shape for it. But more than anything, he gave us the confidence that, breaking these records was possible. Certainly for me, confidence is something that I've really struggled with. I very rarely stand on the start line and think that I can win a race. And certainly I never would have dreamt that I could have broken the Bob Graham record without Martin telling me that all the evidence said that I could. And yeah, there should be a lot more people up there running fast times, and I think it's purely a confidence thing. It's somewhat unique in that, there are plenty of people who are faster than me on the fells and plenty of people who are faster than me on the trails, but you have to be, have good technical ability on rough terrain, but also be able to run a long way. So I think that kind of narrows down the number of people who can run fast times. But certainly I don't see any reason why someone can't come along and break my record, with the right conditions and with the right preparation. So I've come to the end of what I have to say. Thank you for making it this far. I haven't been watching the chat, but I've been seeing plenty of questions popping up. There were a couple of things that people asked me in advance that I haven't covered yet, so I'll just quickly mention those. So several people asked me about food and what I ate during the round. And the strategy I have is something I've been using for the last few years, and I use it in all my races, whether they're 10 hours, 20 hours, 30 hours. And that is, I basically take energy gels. So I use a brand called Spring. So they're not your standard maltodextrin based energy gels. They're basically pureed rice with some fruit, and there's various flavors. So you've got a bit more complex carbohydrate in there. And then I combine that with the Mountain Fuel sports drink, and then have the odd glass of Coke here and there if I fancy it. And I know that my sweet spot is about 80 grams of carbohydrate per hour. And I always calculate that in advance. So I'll work out, if I've got a 4-hour leg, then I'll work out, 4 times 80 and make sure I've got the right amount of fuel. So it's pretty straightforward, really. And the other thing that I'll mention is people have asked me about balancing work with trainings, because I work a lot of antisocial hours, a lot of long days, a lot of night shifts. And I think my advice on this, my opinion of it, has kind of evolved over the years. Say 5 years ago, I probably used to do ridiculous things. I would get up way too early and do a ridiculous volume of training and sustain that for a few weeks, and then get really tired and have to have a few days off training. And you can get reasonably fit like that, but certainly it's not optimal. I probably then went a bit too far the other way, and I'm now at some happy medium. And I think that, as I said before, to get really fit for a race or something, you sometimes do have to take some rest and train hard and compromise on sleep a bit, but it's not sustainable all year round. So I might have a period of really intense training for a few months and then really back off a bit after the big race. I probably had my average sleep per night building up to the Bob Graham was a lot less than it has been over the last few months, for example. So I'll hand back to Matt, I suppose, and I think he's going to fire some questions at me.
Thank you, Beth. I just want to say thank you very much for that. Someone who sits at the other end of the Zoom window in these talks as well, I can't tell you how difficult it is to kind of talk fluently to people. And you've just done a great job. It's really hard when you've not got an audience who can kind of give you any feedback. So you cracked a few jokes in there, and I'm quite sure people were laughing, but you don't know that. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Okay, so I've been clocking the questions, or trying to keep a track of the questions as they've been coming down. I've jotted a few down. I'm going to go through a few. I've got what's one bit of advice you would give for anybody attempting a Bob Graham or around?
Certainly get out on the course as much as possible. That's the number one, because even if you can get in the right amount of climbing and things where you are, it's so useful to know the route well and to practice on that. Do specific training on the right terrain. So it's really rough, and you just need to get efficient at moving fast on that type of terrain.
Okay, next one. This has just come through right now, actually. What do you think, this is Juliet Downs, what do you think needs to change to have equal gender participation in fell running?
That's
big question. Sorry.
Yeah, it's a really difficult question. I thought about this a lot, and maybe we need to think of a round named after a woman. Because all the rounds up there are named after men. So if anyone has any ideas, then please let me know. I've been trying to think up something like that for a while. I think I mean, if someone tells me that I've inspired them to do something, or other people seeing other women do great things on the fells, I hope that really inspires other people to do more. So I think I don't think, fell running doesn't get a lot of coverage in the media, like trail running and other sports do, but certainly equal amounts of publicity helps, and I think the FRA and things have done well with that over the years. So I think if anyone has any great ideas that how to do this, then please let me know.
I actually think that's probably a topic for a talk all in its own right. So maybe we should talk about that and get a few other runners and maybe have like a panel event to discuss it, because I'd be really interested to talk about that further. Okay, it's come up a number of times. Did your dog complete the whole round with you, Beth?
No, she didn't. She didn't run at all on the day, actually. She was with Matt. She did go up Broadstand, and I saw her up there. Although I'll mention that since then, my parents ran the Joss Naylor Challenge, which is a 48-mile route in the lakes, and she did complete all of that as well. And the challenge is for the over 50s, and I think she is over 50 in dog years. So perhaps she's and yes, she did meet Joss at the end, but I haven't noticed that her name's on the list of people that have completed the Joss Naylor Challenge yet.
Okay, so this next question, Beth and I decided at the start of the talk that we were going to each issue a prize. So this is going to be my prize that I'm going to issue. Beth's going to decide hers, but this is to Suzie Roscoe. She was one of the first people to post a question at the start of the talk. She is relatively new to running. She's basically, well, not that new, but she's taking on her first ultra next year. It's the Ring of Fire on Anglesey, which is 135 miles over 3 days. She's got a training program lined up, which will get her fit for that. But she's basically, I think you talked quite a lot about confidence and lack of confidence in believing that you can do these things. And she wants to know what tips you've got to help her keep confidence, to keep to the training regime, to know that she can get the challenge done. So my reason for giving the prize was I figured that if we give you a Salomon rucksack Salomon trail pack to run it with, that might motivate you, Suzie. So thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you. Good question. I think if you're fairly new to the sport, then having smaller goals in the build-up would really help. So even though I don't think it's necessary, physically to run 100k before you run 100 miles, I think that mentally, if you've run a distance that is not quite as long as you have to run in the race, but it's certainly a reasonable distance, and you complete that, then that will give you a lot of confidence. I really think that that confidence is everything. Sometimes I do sessions and things not because I know they're going to physically benefit me, but I know they'll give me confidence. I would recommend thinking of something a bit shorter to do in the build up, and honestly, if you can run 100k, you can run 100 miles. If you can run 100 miles, you can run 200 miles. That's how it works in ultra running.
Okay, next one. I'm going to group a few questions together. There's been lots of questions about favorite races, etc. So quite a number of people said, would you consider a Barkley marathons? A few people said, what's your favorite race in the UK? And then one person said, if you could only race one race ever again, what would it be?
Oh, blimey. I'll start in reverse because that one's fresh in my mind. Whatever again. So if I could just race one race now, it's a race that I haven't done yet, but I really want to do it, is the Hard Rock 100 in the US, in the San Juan. So it's a 100-mile race, and the scenery just looks incredible. And yeah, I really want to go there. I really want to race that race. So if I could just race one more time, I'd choose something I hadn't done before. And my favourite race in the UK, that was another question. Gosh, I would have to say the Lakeland 100, purely because it's a race I've done a couple of times, and yeah, without that race, I probably wouldn't be where I am today with my running. So I just have such fond memories of that race, and the atmosphere is always fantastic. Remind me of the first bit of the question.
Barclay marathons.
Barclay marathons. No.
Sure. For anybody who doesn't know the Barclay marathons, go YouTube it, Google it. It's a phenomenal race in the States. It's absolutely bonkers, and not many people ever complete it, and it looks really horrific. I'm glad Beth said no.
I don't think myself that much.
Oh, this is a good one. Did you brush your teeth during the Bob Graham round?
Yeah, so I have some insight into this question.
I wondered if you might.
I apologise, Ian. I'm drinking wine at the moment, so if you can, my teeth might not look the best. No, not during. No time.
Okay, which brings me on to quite a nice little question. Someone said, do you have any strange or quirky pre-race routines?
No.
Okay.
Not a great answer. No, I'm pretty yeah, no, I don't at all. I'm pretty happy with, I don't even eat the same thing or before a race or no, I don't have. I'm racking my brain. I don't really think I have anything, to be honest. The problem with having, special routines that you have to stick to is it kind of messes with your head if you can't stick to them for whatever reason. So I think purposefully I try and just do whatever I feel like and stay relaxed if I can.
Okay. Altitude training. I think you referenced it, or somebody asked, do you do much altitude training? But the second part of the question, which I thought was a bit more interesting, was, I guess there's a lack of altitude here in the UK. You can't get up above, 3,000 meters, 3 feet. Does that hamper UK athletes for the likes of the UTMB and some of the American trail races, the ultras?
Yes,
do you do it?
Yes, I think it does. And it really depends person to person. So I know plenty of people who could go over and arrive a few days before and run UTMB and not have any issues at all. Personally, I really, really struggle, and I've had a couple of races that have gone really, really wrong just because I haven't been acclimatized. So I try and go out to these races early and spend as much time at altitude as I can. I've never done any altitude training in the UK using, chambers or tents or anything. I think the evidence for them is not great, and certainly the best thing is just to go out to the race. So yeah, it's tricky if using up all your holiday to go and sit in a van on a pass before a race. But that's what I've done actually the last few years before the UTMB.
Interestingly, I don't know whether this applies to you as well, but I'll share a little bit of when I organised for Jasmine to give a talk to Jasmine Paris, who was the previous record holder. She gave a talk at the Buxton Adventure Festival, and she said one of her training routines was to go away to the likes of the Pyrenees and the Alps on walking holidays and spend lots of hours on her feet, not necessarily running, but just up at altitude for 12-hour shifts.
Yeah, I think great. Yeah, certainly good training. There's not much benefit in going up. It depends how long before the actual race that it is that you're spending in altitude, because obviously you lose it quite quickly. But I think hiking is great. The issue with me is that you only have a certain number of weeks of annual leave in the year, and I think for me personally, spending that time at altitude immediately before the race is probably most beneficial for me. But as I said, everyone's different. The likes of Damien Hall, who's had several great runs at the UTMB, he doesn't struggle at all. It's just not an issue for him. So it really depends on person to person. And I certainly figured out the hard way.
Damien's listening, by the way. I noticed his name pop up, so careful what you say. Damien, if you've got anything to say, I can unmute you. You can have a chat if you like. Just let me know privately. Okay. Going back to the Bob Graham, someone said, what would you do differently if you did it again? And someone else has asked, how fast can a woman run it? How-
So I'll set the answer to the second question. There's a couple of people that I know who I think could knock a chunk off. Whether they'll go for it or not, I don't know. But yeah, I'm going to say 14 hours. Yeah, I reckon in the next 5 years, someone will run 14 hours. And what would I do differently? Not a lot, I don't think. Honestly, I mean, there are little things, tiny little bits where we could have taken a slightly better route. Certainly, if I did it again, I would spend more time on the route. I don't think you can ever spend enough time on the route. So yeah, I'd probably, if I did it again, spend more time looking at different lines and things. But you know, on the day, there wasn't really an awful lot that I would change, I suppose.
Okay. Well, I guess a few people have asked, would you have another go at it? Do you plan to?
No.
No. Okay.
No, I don't think so. I'll do something else instead. I mean, certainly if someone came and ran 14:33, then maybe I'd think about it. But yeah, and no plans to repeat it anytime soon. No.
Okay, so I kind of know the answer to this one, but how do you stay injury free? Someone's asked me.
Yeah, no, I don't. That's the answer. So in beginning of September, I was supporting a friend on the Bob Graham. So you know, people help you, you help other people. That's kind of how it works. So I was supporting a friend, and I fell over at the end of leg two and broke my ankle. So so that's the answer to that. I think, you know, you can do as much as you can to prevent injuries. I do lots of strength and conditioning and stuff, and I do my best, but you can't completely avoid freak accidents and things. And certainly if you're pushing it with your training, if you're, training is risky, especially if you want to get really fit. So yeah, I'm not immune to injuries. No, not at all.
So that brings me on to probably the penultimate question. Do you have a recovery program between the big runs and races?
I mean, yes and no. So I tend to start running pretty quickly after a race. I know that for me, just to keep moving, if it's just doing really slow short runs is best. I don't like to have like a long period off after a race, and I just do that until I start to feel like I want to go again. I have a session that it's not something I kind of decided in advance, but now I've done it so many times that I know it's kind of a test for me. So a few weeks after a race, I'll do a 2-hour moderate pace run, so kind of comfortably hard. And if I can run for the 2 hours and still feel I'm running at a certain pace and still feeling good at the end, then I know I'm ready to jump back into the next training block. But if I feel tired, if it doesn't feel right, then I know that I need more time to rest. So yeah, I keep it flexible, but I've been through the process of coming back too soon after long races before, so I feel like it's just experience, I suppose.
There were quite a number of fairly technical questions asking about VO2 maxes and heart rates and training zones, etc. I'm kind of avoiding getting too nitty gritty in there because there's so many people on this chat. But I will try and take a transcription of all the questions and send them to you and put them somewhere where there may be an opportunity for you to answer some of them. But I'm going to go to the opposite end of the spectrum and finish off with a question that someone said. It's nice to know that there are people on this talk who are relatively new to the sport, and they said, have you got any top tips for newbies who are taking up trail running?
I would say, I mean, so if I'd been doing this talk a year ago, I would have said enter a race, because I think that entering a race really, once you've like started to do some races, you get more involved in the community, you meet other people, you find out what other people are doing, and you kind of form that community, I suppose. At the moment, obviously, that's a lot harder, and I would say, you know, just try and meet like-minded people. Go out on the hills, have a nice time, go somewhere that excites you, run in nice places, obviously within your tier, um, and yeah, if anyone has any, you know, newbies have questions, and I'm more than happy to help out with advice, with kit or training or anything like that. Yeah, I really enjoy, you know, being able to help other people, and yeah, I feel like yeah, it's really nice to feel like I'm giving something back, so I'm more than happy to help with other specific things.
On that note then, how would people get in touch with you?
So I'm on all the social media channels. Luckily, I think I am the only Beth Pascall anywhere, so I'm easy to find. I also have a website which has a contact page, which is bethpascall.com, so nice and easy to remember. Yeah, and get in touch with me with any other questions.
Thank you very much, Beth, and thanks very much indeed. I'm just trying to copy and paste something into the chat now for people, so that you can see how to donate to Mountain Rescue and Lake District and to Buxton Adventure Festival, so that we can afford to put more talks on. I'm just putting that on there, but I will follow it up with email with a whole bunch more information. So I don't know whether you are able at this stage to pull a favourite question out of there, or whether you want to send. I can send you the list of questions, and then you could do it separately, and we can get in touch. It's up to you. I don't want to put you on the spot.
I think I have the answer. I don't know who it was, because I don't think I saw it on the chat, but the person who asked me if my dog did the whole Bob Graham round. My dog is right by my feet right now, and she'd look up at that point actually and was like, oh, that sounds like a good idea.
Okay, I will look back through the chat and see who that was, unless that person wants to get in touch on the chat and let me know now, and we will be in touch. I guess all that's left now is to leave you to finish your mulled wine and curl up with your dog and wish everybody a Merry Christmas. And thanks, guys. I will post the whole chat, the whole talk on YouTube. So if you missed any of it, I know some people were logging out and logging back in. And if you didn't get your question answered, I'm sorry, but yeah, there was an awful lot of them. So I tried to choose a broad range of them. Thank you very much indeed, Beth. And I'm sure we'll be seeing plenty more of you in the record books in the not too distant future.
Thanks a lot, Matt, and thanks to everyone for coming, and have a wonderful socially distanced Christmas.